Bandit, one of my good friends. There you go, buddy. There you go, Bandit. There you go. There you go, buddy. Yeah, there you go, right there. There you go, buddy. There's some cake there. Oh, you got. You took that donut. Yeah, that's my buddy Bandit right there. That's my buddy. Also got these for him too. It looks like he already ate that pile of them right there. So I'm gonna pour these down here for him. There you go, buddy. There you go, Bandit. There you go. There you go, Bandit. There you go. You're all right. There you go, Bandit. Yep, right there. There you go. Yeah, there you go, buddy. You're all right. There you go, buddy. You're fine. You get your chocolate cake. There you go. You're all right. That's my buddy Bandit. My dog's down here wanting to bite him. You're all right, buddy. He's licking his paws. You what you want? Some more donut? You're all right. You want me to turn that music down for you? I'm sorry. You like your World War II documentary. Want some more chocolate cake, buddy? There you go. You're all right. Told you I won't hurt you. There you go. There's some more cake. You only live once, right, buddy? He's like, oh, let me go lick my paws clean, motherfucker. He'll go dive off the roof and climb back up. He is. His name's Bandit. He's actually heading over there, too, to the edge of the roof. Where you going, buddy? Taking that cake with you? He's taking a piece of cake with him. Oh, I wonder if Rocky's coming. Rocky's a piece of... I'm not a big fan of Rocky. Oh, Bandit. Bandit's over there at the edge of the roof. He'll jump off. Do you got any raccoons by you? You could. You could. I've only had Bandit here coming for about a month and a half. I've been feeding squirrels here and birds now for about 3 years almost, but he just started coming. All it takes is food. Just repeatedly feed them. Your parents. Oh no, that's. Well, I don't live with my parents, so I don't have to worry about that. Yeah, this raccoon, he comes on my roof right here. This is a roof. But he just took off, I think. But he'll be back. He comes back. He takes off and gets little drinks and stuff like that, and then he comes back. I'm waiting for my friend to show up on here so that person can see him. I'm not here yet for some reason. Yeah, raccoons are awesome. They are awesome. They're very interesting to observe too. Like the way they eat, the way they dip their paws in the water. Raccoons dip their paws in the water so they can feel things better. And it's so cool to see them do it. And then they lick their little paws clean, and the way they reach for stuff. The big test. Okay. Anyway, it's cool to see the little raccoons reach out with their hands, their little paws, and reach for the peanuts, the donuts. He's been just getting this cake right here with his mouth. Man, that shit's getting weird, dude. I don't like that shit, dude, man. What the fuck, man? Makes me want to start this fucking video with this. Jesus Christ, dude. And this is the second time that's happened now. I don't know how long it's going to be before Bandit makes his way back. I don't know if he left because Rocky is coming. Rocky is not nice. Where's that 40 acre? Yeah, he could be back soon, maybe not. I don't know. I love Peter Griffin, dude. Fucking love him. Is that the first piece of cake? Bandit was here right away. Is it a donut? Okay, where's the first video at? I thought I had a whole nother video here. I guess not. Bandit is great. Oops. Too far there. Bandit. Little bastard. I don't know if he's coming back or not. I was just making this video for my friend. Oh, this fucking pen sucks, dude. Well, we'll see. We'll see if Bandit comes back or not. That's a piece of chocolate cake right there. That's for Bandit. My buddy. Okay, I don't like that. Let's do it like that. Look at that. Oh, what's that, 40? What you doing? What you doing, baby egg? Huh? What's that little egg doing? Hmm? Oh, what's she doing down there? Hmm? What's she doing? Walking up here. Yeah, that little egg girl. Oh, 48. You're alright. You little baby. You little corny egg. Come here. Let's see. You see that Bandit? Have you ever met Bandit? You'll growl and bark at him, won't you? Yes, you will. Yes, you will. Bandit's my raccoon. It eats donuts and cake and peanuts and M&Ms. You know that? You know that. You little puppy. No, I know that. What are you doing? Did you eat a cheeseburger? Did you hide that cheeseburger? I'm gonna get your cheeseburger. I'm gonna get that cheeseburger. I'm gonna get it, you. You smell that? What's that? Where'd Bandit go? Hmm? Where'd he go? Where'd that raccoon go? Where'd he go? You thought you were gonna taste some raccoon tonight? You can't do that. You can't do that. You can't be a vicious little wolf. You're a chihuahua. Don't bite my nose. Oh, you. Why don't you go cripple over there? You cripple right over there, you go. There you go. There you go. I don't think Bandit's coming back. He's all hyped up off that cake. He loved that cake. But he took off. That wind or Rocky or I don't know what it was. YouTube, I can't. Well, I guess I could. I could stop recording for a second. like that. Piece of crap. Bandit took his fill and then disappeared. He might be back. I feel like Rocky's gonna come though. Let's put on our World War II. Maybe Bandit was mad about that. The 5-hour one. Here it is.
For the total war to come, the world had borne witness to terror bombing campaigns,
There we go.
unrestrained violence against civilians, to incalculable numbers of refugees displaced by war. Borne witness, and if it had not exactly shrugged its shoulders, it had resigned itself to one fact. This is what war now meant. As the 1930s wore on, and the inability of the League of Nations to maintain collective security became clear, hopes for a lasting peace disintegrated. Mussolini took power. Stalin took power. Spain erupted. Hitler and the Nazi Party rose to power. And Japan's imperial intentions became increasingly clear. Economies and populations across the globe began to mobilize for a war that the years between wars had shown would be decided on the battlefield, and at sea,
You wanna say hi?
and in the factories and down the mines, and in the homes and classrooms, and on the streets, and on the farms. It would be total war.
Little Ache wanna say hi. Wanna say hi?
Total war is all-encompassing. A war without boundary or limitation. In the Second World War, massive armies advanced, confronting whole populations with impossible choices. The manufacturer of
48 was saying hi
workforce,
to people on YouTube.
area bombing campaigns reduced cities to
She wants to say hi again.
sieges doomed populations to starvation.
Say hi.
Racial policies sponsored campaigns of genocide. At the heart of this conflict were ordinary people who would reveal both the best and worst of humanity.
I hear the train.
People whose lives were lost or mortgaged to the demands of total war.
Hear the train? There's a train. You hear that train, yeah? Maybe Bandit knew that train was coming. We should take off fast.
To fight a total war, munitions industries had to be revitalized, populations mobilized, and economies refocused towards war. Attempts were made in the 1920s and early 1930s to maintain peace. But as treaty after treaty was violated, it became clear that total war was increasingly probable. By the mid-1930s, nations began to mobilize in earnest.
So right through the interwar years, people are very aware that a new total war will require mass mobilization. Indeed, this is one of the fears people had, that another great war would have tremendous economic as well as political and unchangeable consequences.
The threat of total war sparked an arms race for ever greater numbers of technologically advanced weapons. Total war would be fought in the factories as well as on the battlefields, by workers as well as soldiers. Many believed victory would be won by whichever nation could produce and deploy greatest number of weapons. This understanding of the strain that total war would put on nations inspired rounds of peace agreements. In the 1920s and early 1930s, a series of conferences and agreements were created in the hope of maintaining peace and preventing an arms race.
What are you doing down there, huh?
Though some of these pacts met with initial success,
Don't make that face.
the momentum towards total war steadily increased as each agreement faltered.
Dough.
There were high hopes for the disarmament
What are you
conferences in
sniffing?
Geneva in February
What
1932
are
and
you
1933.
sniffing over there?
Representatives from 60
What's
countries
that?
attended.
Well,
The
what's that?
negotiations
That's
failed when Germany
that's
sought
Bandit's
military
cake.
parity with other Western powers
You can't have
and
that.
rejected any
You
plan that
can't.
deemed deliberate. The hope of a world with fewer weapons was finally dashed when both Germany and Japan
48.
withdrew from the League of Nations in 1933.
It is now clear that the disarmament conference will not fulfill what is its sole object, namely general disarmament. The German government is accordingly compelled to leave the disarmament conference.
One by one, as these numerous promises of peace were broken, total war looked more and more likely. Nations across the globe began to prepare.
I think we need to think in terms of what at the time statesmen, scholars, military thinkers of all ideological shades thought mobilization meant. And what they really thought it meant at core was the mobilization of the power of the state to affect the economy, markets, to put people in jobs and positions in uniform with ever greater force.
Hitler began planning for rearmament as early as 1933,
What
but
are
kept
you
his
doing?
activities secret from the international community until 1935. Thereafter, as he openly defied the conditions of the Treaty of Versailles, Hitler's path to total war became increasingly clear to the international community.
By about 1936, you're seeing
I
a
thought
global
that guy wanted
war. What's
peace.
interesting is that there was an assumption that those states that had dictatorships, that had state-controlled economies, had a lead in rearmament.
The Reich's law for the construction of the armed forces reintroduced conscription, included plans for the expansion of the Navy and Army, with the Army to reach 580,000 men by 1939. Versailles had kept the Army at 100,000. The new Air Force would combine with the Navy and Army to create the Wehrmacht. Hitler's four-year plan, launched in 1936, laid out his aims for rearmament. In 4 years, Hitler demanded the German army must be ready for combat, and the German economy must be capable of war. The heart of the plan was self-sufficiency, or autarky.
The German armed forces often talked about having some sort of economic dictator, someone who would come in and subordinate the aircraft manufacturers, the armored fighting vehicle manufacturers, petroleum industry, and so on, to create an independent, self-sufficient economy. Externally, it looked like
It's that smoke from
Germany
Canada from them fires up
was
there.
some sort of grand Machiavellian plan that was
I
all
trapped some
perfect.
of it in my freezer.
And outsiders tended to assume
Just
this.
unthought
So
it.
French and British military intelligence assumed that the Germans were doing everything efficiently and beautifully. The truth is, it was disorder and chaos on the inside.
One example of such inefficiency was the lack of standardization across German industry. At one point, German factories were producing 425 different kinds of airplanes, 151
So
types of
funny, she
trucks,
just brought the cheeseburger bun in here
150 different motorcycles.
and dropped it on the floor.
When Germany went to war, this diversity, which made staggering demands on the spare parts inventory, was to prove disastrous.
When we think about Goering running the 4-year plan,
You want fresh
he may have been once a great
cheeseburgers,
aviator,
Stuart?
but did he understand the fundamentals of running the German economy?
Cheeseburger,
I
Slim
don't think so.
Jims. I don't know what else you've snuck.
In response to the increasing threat of war, Britain followed a dual strategy of rearmament and appeasement.
What are you doing?
The diplomatic solutions
Got your keys
sometimes
right
came at a
down
cost
there.
to
What are
others.
you in here for, huh?
Germany
You gonna tell me
invaded
something?
Austria in March 1938.
What you bring that gun in here for? I'll just
The
steal your
Union,
keys
or
over there.
Anschluss, was
Keys
confirmed
in
a
my
month later
bed.
by orchestrated
You
plebiscite,
know, I'm gonna find the keys
returning a vote
blanket.
99.7% in favor.
I see now. Yeah, I
Britain
did.
did not see the Anschluss as a
Where
threat,
is it?
so did not oppose it.
No.
The southern region had also been returned to Germany following a plebiscite in
Yeah,
1935.
up here.
Joy day in the South. Germany exults in reunion with her divorced province.
Hitler was taking tentative steps
No,
towards
I'm
his
gonna
goal
steal
of a
your
greater
cheeseburger
Germany
later and eat it.
and finding little
Yeah, that-
opposition. Lebensraum, living space, which meant expansion to the east, must
You
follow.
look at me like that. You're gonna hold it in the bed.
The sacrifice of the Sudetenland in the Munich Agreement was the
Kissing
most
is
cynical
not
example
enough.
of Britain's appeasement
I
policies in action.
steal.
The Sudeten region of Czechoslovakia included about 3 million people of German origin. Hitler began planning for the occupation of Czechoslovakia in May 1938. As the situation escalated
What's the
and war
matter,
looked
baby?
imminent,
What's that box so for? Oh, there you go.
British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain met with Hitler to negotiate. After a series of negotiations, a four-power conference was held to decide the issue. In September 1938, the leaders of Britain and France complied with Hitler's demands. The Sudetenland was surrendered to Germany in exchange for a hollow promise of peace.
Britain was very much influenced by its experience in the First World War. The cost in blood and treasure had been so great that there was a feeling that if in any way they could negotiate a war away, that is, appease Hitler in particular, they would do
My
it.
guy's been playing all day.
The Munich Agreement and the appeasement
Little
strategy
40s when
did
you
not
have
secure
some
peace
Peter
for our
Griffin
time, as Chamberlain claimed. But it did buy time enough for Britain to continue to scale up preparations for war.
What's important to understand about the arms race from 1936 to 1941 is that it's not simply about building up forces, not building ships, not just about building tanks or men. It's about expanding the economic base, regimenting people, and securing the resources you need to wage toward war.
As nations edged closer to total war, an ever-increasing amount of the British national budget was being allocated to defence. In 1935, the British Royal Navy was the largest in the world, and the Royal Air Force was among the most
Anyone
powerful.
see Bandit?
It was only the army that remained relatively small as part of a strategy that sought to fight
Bandit,
total
come
war
back.
at arm's length.
Chocolate cakes.
What does this mean? It means no conscription, either in the United Kingdom or in the rest of the empire. It means a focus on attacking not enemy armed forces, but enemy populations and enemy industry. The means to do this were what we might call today high-tech weapons, a very powerful Royal Navy and a very powerful Air Force centered on bombing. Now, the aim of this was to achieve offensive power at a low cost, both a financially low cost and a low cost in terms of the non-militarization of British society.
The French invested in defence. Work began on the Maginot Line in 1930.
Just look at
This heavily fortified defensive barrier, running parallel to the border with Germany, would repel an invasion and prevent repetition of the catastrophic losses of the First World War,
this smiley face.
so long as the invaders were obliging enough to come in the expected direction. The Maginot Line was defense-based on the lessons of trench warfare, and in the event would be no match for the mobility of the Blitzkrieg in the war to come. But the French were allied to a country that was, thanks to its empire, a true superpower.
The two greatest empires in the world, the French Empire and the British Empire, were united and could quite reasonably anticipate emerging victorious over Germany should there be a war with Germany.
What little kids to squeeze you? And your gimpy condition? Oh,
In the
don't
Soviet
get me
Union,
like that.
Stalin anticipated a future war,
We know you
knowing his nation was not as prepared as it could be.
The Soviet Union expected war for a very long time, and they knew that they were behind. They had lost the First World War. They assumed that one of the reasons they lost was that they were not adequately prepared.
By implementing a series of 5-year plans, ruthless programs of collectivization and industrialization, Stalin transformed the Soviet Union into an industrialized socialist state.
There's a very drastic appreciation of the potential dangers of living in what they perceived as capitalist encirclement. That is the only socialist country, and the perception was that everybody wanted to invade them.
What are you saying, man?
Collectivization gathered individually owned farms into state collective farms. The plan aimed to free laborers for work in factories. The implementation was brutal. An estimated 5 million supposedly wealthier peasants, known as kulaks, were killed or deported. The 5-year plans also nationalized industry and
I
services.
feel like the principal's
A
talking
large
to
share
me
of the
on
investment
speaker.
was directed into heavy industry at the expense of consumer goods. This command economy helped prepare the nation for total war. The 5-year plans shattered the lives of millions. They also militarized the Soviet Union so that it was better prepared to fight a total war than it might otherwise have been.
Some shit like that.
For example, in 1927, the Soviet Union
10
produced
hours of
only
detention.
500 motor vehicles. 13 years later, in 1940, they're producing 200,000. It says a lot about the 5-year plans that Stalin initiates, and just how heavily focused they were on heavy industry and on armaments. This is key to surviving the German invasion of the Soviet Union.
When the Germans launched their invasion of the Soviet Union, Operation Barbarossa, the gaps in Soviet preparations for war became clear.
But we must also be careful in looking at Soviet production. The material itself does not account for military effectiveness. In other words, we shouldn't confuse the two. You need a full system of war to truly utilize all of this production, and that means good doctrine, good training, and good command culture.
The leadership of the Red Army had been severely compromised by the 1937 purges, in which some of the Red Army's greatest leaders had been charged with involvement in a Nazi-Soviet plot. Thousands were executed, and tens of
My
thousands
neighbor that
discharged
thinks
from
he's
their
my great
positions.
grandpa thinks he
The
was
Great
in World
Purge
War II.
seriously weakened the army as the nation prepared for
He's
total
not my
war.
grandpa. And I don't think he was in
But
World
the
War
Soviet
II.
Union was able to hold against the German invasion
He says
because
he
it
was.
mobilized its resources and population so effectively.
He says all kinds of shit. I think he's racist.
Because it drew the invaders into enormous territory, stretching supply lines. Because the Russian winter was a powerful ally. And because the Red Army did not stop fighting.
His name's Theodore.
For the Soviet case, it's, I think, nearly an ideal typical
Theodore
total war. The activities of the state focus nearly completely and exclusively on mobilization to war and on provision of the Red Army, to the extent that they give up a lot of
He's an
things
old
they had done
blue-eyed
about controlling
bald
civilian
guy.
consumption, distribution, and basically lets locals deal with
He
it.
can hardly walk. He shuffles around and groans all
The
the time.
United States abstained from mobilizing for
Talks about
war
World
altogether
War
in the
II.
1930s. Weary of European wars and equally wary of bankers and munitions dealers who sought to make their fortunes in war, the focus remained on neutrality for as long as possible. Weapons manufacturers were also reluctant to get involved again. When the armistice came into effect at the end of the First World War, government
That's
munitions
all,
contracts
man.
had been abruptly terminated.
I was just making up a
Tax
story.
laws prevented companies from writing off machines which were not worn
My
out or
grandpa's right
obsolete.
here.
Factories
He's
across the
sleeping
country
right
were
next to
demolished,
me.
including what was at the time the biggest rifle manufacturing plant in the world.
On the other hand, as Europe darkened over the 1930s, you had an increasing group of people who thought that the safety of the United States was very much tied up with keeping Europe out of war. And so therefore, the difficulty of the United States in the 1930s was with the Depression. 1/3 of the country was out of work for a considerable time. And the fact that because of this, the U.S. didn't really have a foreign policy in the 1930s. No one really knew what they wanted to do, or if they did know what they wanted to do, they weren't sure they could actually accomplish it. So moving towards the Second World War in the United States, you had a lot of confusion.
Go back to sleep, then.
In September 1939, one poll suggested that at least 2/3 of the population had no desire to provide aid to the Allies.
What's the matter, kid?
But within a few short years, the United States was transformed from an isolationist nation intent on neutrality to the arsenal of
Don't talk to
democracy.
him, Nick. She also don't
To create the arsenal, President Roosevelt ramped up the defense budget.
We must increase production facilities for everything needed for the Army and Navy for national defense.
The most prominent examples was the Second Naval Expansion Act signed by the President in July 1940, which granted $4 billion towards construction for the Navy. In December 1940, a year before the United States declared war, President Roosevelt made it clear that to preserve American independence against the Nazi threat, American production had to mobilize. Rearmament was essential. Providing weapons to the nations fighting against the Nazis would, Roosevelt hoped, enable the U.S. to stay out of the fight.
Is that why you came up here?
The distribution of the arsenal began with Lend-Lease.
Lend-Lease was put in place because President Roosevelt, and then gradually other members of the administration, the Congress, decided if the United Kingdom, and indeed the Empire, was not supported, it was going to go under. One of the isolation laws had said no one could buy anything unless they bought it with cash and carried it back in their own ships. Well, increasingly, Britain didn't have any cash.
Aware of the need to remain neutral in law, if not in thought, President Roosevelt sought a solution. If Britain could not pay for supplies, the United States would lend them, with payment later in the form of a consideration rather than cash. U.S. Congress passed the Lend-Lease Act in early 1941.
So our country is going to be what our people have proclaimed it must be, the arsenal of democracy.
It would have been very difficult for the United Kingdom, extremely difficult for them to pay for ships, to pay for men, to pay for whatever the accoutrements of war might be. And of course, Russia was in that sense the same. The United States gave food, it gave munitions, it gave steel, it gave all sorts of things that these countries could not have produced.
Lend-Lease ultimately extended some $50 billion in assistance to as many as 40 nations, including Great Britain, the Soviet Union, China, and British Commonwealth countries. But the policy was not purely altruistic.
The thing is, although Churchill called it the most unsorted act in history, and in a sense it was, on the other hand, the United States during the war used Lend-Lease to impose a lot of policies on the United Kingdom, for one, that were very hurtful. Lend-Lease, as far as I'm concerned, was also for the United States a weapon, a real weapon, to try to replace the pound with the dollar and to replace Britain as the major financial power in the world with the United States. And of course it worked.
As the arms race developed through the 1930s, the total war to come was, in a sense, already being fought. The outcome of the war was determined as much on the factory floor as on the battlefield. Production was vital for victory. As the major powers prepared for war in Europe, production increased exponentially. Factories went into overdrive. In 1933, for instance, Britain produced 633 aircraft, Germany 368, and France produced none at all. The Soviet Union, in comparison, produced 2,595 aircraft. By the last year of the decade, France produced over 2,000 aircraft. Germany had caught up to the Soviet Union's level of production, with both producing over 10,000 aircraft each. Britain produced the greatest number that year, with over 15,000 aircraft manufactured. Once the United States entered the war, its factories and factory workers made a significant difference to the Allied war effort. If total war relied on the factory, the American factories were willing and able to deliver victory.
The United States, until after the Second World War, didn't believe in huge standing armies and navies. They could be a threat and they cost money. So the mobilizing both militarily, in terms of the Navy, in terms of industry, and in terms of manpower, really all began once the United States was in war.
Americans are preparing with all possible speed to take their places on the battlefront. Workers in the mills and the mines are laboring long hours under great pressure to turn out the weapons, the equipment without which the war cannot be won.
Over the course of the war, American manufacturers shifted their focus to war production. U.S. manufacturers produced in excess of 300,000 aircraft, compared to Germany's 111,000 and Japan's 76,000. American factories produced over 88,000 tanks, contrasted with German output of some 46,000 and Japan's 2,500. The significance of the contribution of United States production to the war effort becomes increasingly clear. Perhaps most startling was the number of military trucks which rolled off the United States assembly lines. Some 2.38 million, compared to around 345,000 for Germany and 165,000 for Japan. By 1943, the US was said to be producing a tank every 5 minutes, an aircraft every half hour, and an aircraft carrier every week. When Britain mobilized, it drew not only on its own national resources and population, but those of its empire. This belies the common perception that Britain stood alone against the Axis powers in 1940.
Oh, Jesus Christ, you're eating like a pig.
After the Second World War, many Britons prided themselves on having mobilized more than any other nation. That's to say that the United Kingdom had a higher proportion of soldiers plus arms workers to total population of any belligerent nation. In fact, it's a very misleading statistic. The reason the United Kingdom was able to mobilize so much was that the British Empire and the United States wanted it so mobilized and supported it with raw materials and with food so that it could do precisely that.
Canadian industry contributed vehicles, weapons, ships and aircraft. Over the course of the war, Canadian factories produced more than 800,000 military transport vehicles and 16,000 military aircraft. The extent to which the United Kingdom could wage total war was contingent upon the efforts and commitment of the people of the British Empire.
If one looks at the case of the Soviet Union, or indeed Nazi Germany, there we see a much greater commitment to war. But the extent of mobilization in terms of people at the front or in the arms factories is limited by the fact that these countries have to grow their own food. They have to produce their own raw materials.
Germany also relied on the work of forced laborers to sustain its war effort. The number of slave laborers Germany pressed into service in 5 years was at least equal to the number that crossed the Atlantic during almost 400 years of the slave trade. Food and raw materials were vital to waging total war. For nations which relied on imports for food supply, This could present considerable
Until it's gotta go
problems.
to the bathroom.
Really,
Have you ever seen it eat
the
mulberries?
start way back in the
Man, you should
1870s
see
when
that.
the European
I don't
population
wanna hear
started
it.
to shift
That
away
shit's
from a
fucking
grain-based
splattered
diet toward a
pattern.
meat and
Practically the
milk-based diet. And
shit
that
painting
means
of
you have to import
raccoons.
a lot more
The Leonardo da
fodder to
Vinci's
feed
of
the
all
animals to produce
raccoons.
the meat and the
They
milk.
use their shit
And
as
for
their
Britain, that's fine.
paintings.
But that was a real
And they eat
problem for
mulberries.
Germany.
You just
In
fucking
Germany,
splatter
the
that
raw
shit all
materials
over
took
the trees.
priority
You gotta
over
watch
food
where you're
supplies.
going. What you're touching.
Goering
If you're a
was
tree
quite
climber,
serious when he said
you
we've
be
chosen
careful, 'cause
guns
they fucking
over
shit
butter
everywhere.
because
Get
they
diarrhea
didn't
from
want to
them
spend
damn
money
fucking
on
mulberries.
importing fodder from Denmark
Maybe it's
or
a mixture
bacon
of
or
mulberries
milk or
and
whatever
milk.
to feed the
What
working
else
classes. They want to
raccoons eat
spend
out
it
there?
on iron from Sweden to
It's
Riyadh.
definitely raccoon shit.
That makes them aggressive, that makes them look to the east. That's always the plan, that they will invade Russia and take over Eastern Europe in order to grow food for the German population.
I'm talking about animal shit in the foot.
Access to
I'm
resources
talking about
was a
animal
great
shit,
strength for
and
the
they're
British
talking about
war
World
effort.
War II.
It did not have to rely solely on internal resources to prosecute the war, but it also made the nation vulnerable. Imports traveled by sea. The support offered by the US through Lend-Lease would have come to nothing if maritime supply lines were compromised.
Well, you would be too if you've seen as many piles
The
of
German
fucking
Navy
shit
sought
as
to
I
use
have.
U-boats to blockade, starve, and ultimately defeat
Holy
Britain.
shit, dude.
The fight to secure the supply lines against German U-boats
Fucking
was known as the Battle of the Atlantic.
It was the vital logistic battle of the war.
And I've seen every type
Whether
of
it
shit you can
failed or
imagine out
succeeded
there.
on either side
Even
really
human
determined
shit.
the course of the war and how well it
Fucking
was
the
going
nastiest shit.
profoundly influenced what each side could be doing in
Seriously,
other
these
campaigns.
nasty motherfuckers shit right on the
German
goddamn
U-boat
trail.
commander Admiral Karl Dönitz
think that was
fought the
last
Battle of the
year.
Atlantic with total war in mind.
That was disgusting, man. Them motherfuckers.
But he also faced competition from other arms of the German military for men and
fucking
resources.
beer cans everywhere. Yeah, it was crazy.
Dönitz saw the Battle of the Atlantic as a tonnage
And I
war,
smelled it
a race
first.
between a number
That
of
was
ships
the
either
worst
submarines
part.
or U-boats could sink,
That smell, man. That was nasty as fuck.
and the speed with which the
Half
Allies
the
could
time
bring
I'm in
new
the
ships and
forest,
crews
like
into
when I see the
production.
raccoon shit
It's
and
usually
shit,
thought
like
that the main
even the
impediment to
coyote
British
shit,
imports
the deer
were the
shit, the rabbit
submarines
shit,
that were attacking
geese
merchant
shit,
ships.
I don't be smelling it first.
But really the main
Well, I
impediment
smelled
was the
this
lack
shit
of
first.
merchant ships.
Oh,
More and more merchant
man,
ships
that
were
was
needed
so
because trade
disgusting.
routes had become very much
I don't
longer.
even want to describe
And the
that
threat
shit,
of
man.
submarines
I
meant
won't.
you had to convoy ships
Man, dude, that was
together in
not
large numbers, which
normal.
delayed the movement of
That's
ships.
all I'm gonna say.
So it's not the submarines
You would've
themselves
thought
that are
Bigfoot took
significant,
this
it's
shit.
the
You
potential
would have
effect
thought
of,
this shit was taken
of
by some
submarines.
fucking
At the height of the
type
U-boat
of monkey
campaign,
or something, the
the
way it
wolf
was
packs
just
stalked
disgusting.
Allied convoys and
Some type
ravaged
of
ships.
creature, you know?
The Allies lost 575 ships to the
Oh, no,
U-boats
that was
in
a
the
human
last 6
ship.
months of 1942.
These nasty motherfuckers admitted it. I
The
won't
British
say who,
understood
but
the
they
dire threat
admitted
the
it.
U-boats posed. The campaign had the
They
potential
were
to starve
drinking.
both war
They told me
industries
they were
and the
drinking and had to
population.
go. It's like, what the fuck
It had the
are you
potential
guys?
to bring the nation to
Right
its
there in the
knees.
trail.
In 1943, Winston Churchill
They were
asserted
all
in a
laughing.
statement to the House of
They
Commons
were laughing.
that the
It was
U-boat
funny.
warfare takes the first place in our thoughts.
And I was
May
thinking
the
in my
German
head, I was
Admiralty
like, man, I
made
bet you they
extreme
don't have toilet
exertions
paper or
to
nothing.
meet this, the British, American, and Canadian forces of the sea
That
and
was
air
disgusting.
hurled their strength upon the U-boats.
The Allies fought the U-boats
I've
with a
seen some
combination of
weird
radar,
shit taken
aerial
in
patrols,
heights.
convoys, and mine laying.
The turn of the
I
tide
think
was
the
the
weirdest
result of
thing
a
I've
whole
ever seen
combination
taken
of
my
events.
heights
It
for
was the
me,
result of the
for me,
continuing
on my heights,
evolution
the
of the
weirdest thing I
intelligence
ever
system.
saw.
It was the result
Was
of
children's
the
clothes.
increase in strength of the escort forces.
Children's
It was the
clothes
result
out
of
there, like
technological
full
developments.
outfits, but no people at all.
Hunted the U-boats from the air,
Very
and did
weirdly
charges
just like
if and when they
placed.
encountered their enemy.
That was probably the weirdest thing. In fact, that was so
Searching
weird to me
miles
that it
and
gave me
miles of
like
ocean
chills
for a
when I
shadow
found the
beneath
two
the waves
outfits.
was a monotonous task which required significant physical
I went
and
live
mental
on
endurance
Facebook and
for the
everything.
crew to keep alert for hours at a time.
That was. I was on live on Facebook like, man, should I call the cops about this or Should I just not have any type of involvement? Because this is kind of weird right here. And I looked around all over the place. I didn't find anything.
Germany realized too late that the campaign...
Yeah, I was creeped out by it. It gave me like chills. Let's just say that. But that's the weirdest for me. That was the weirdest.
It was a
Maybe not the
constant
weirdest, but
battle
like the
of
creepiest.
offence versus defence.
Weirdest.
Developing
Okay, yeah,
technology
that
on
was the
both sides.
creepiest. The weirdest
Fundamentally,
thing I ever found
all
out there
these
was
things
this
together
bug.
with perhaps the most important,
This
which
bug,
was
I don't even know
the
if I
provision
can
of
describe it
long-range
correctly.
aircraft and air
This
support
bug
to the
had, like,
convoys, which created a
I don't
system
know,
which was able to
20
reduce the
different
Cuba
types
threat.
of legs on it. It had 4 sets of wings on it. It had like a strong armored body and then like a worm tail. Like it was like a caterpillar type tail. And then a hook came out of this caterpillar tail. And its head looked like part beetle, part ant, part fucking, what is it, praying mantis. With these giant, like, this like claw for a mouth. And I kept this bug because I wanted to show it to my science teacher. Mr. Fuzzinato was his name. He was married to Miss Fuzzinato. And I wanted to show it to him. I got expelled from the school. I got expelled. I never got to bring it to the school because I went to school and I forgot it and I ended up getting to my last fight at that school and I got expelled and kicked off the property. But I kept them bones for years, and I kept them in my mom's drawer. They were in this metal desk drawer that locked. One year I was going through the drawers and I found
massive
it, and
involvement of the
this bug,
civilian population
not
in a
animal,
way that has never happened
had
before.
bones. It
Being a
had left
citizen was no
bones
longer
over when
about
it
just
died.
doing your own thing
Little
and voting
tiny
every 5 years or
skull,
something. It was
little
about
tiny
what are you doing
backbone,
to help
little
the war
tiny
effort.
leg bones. It was a crazy, like a lizard. But it wasn't, it was a bug, I'm telling you. That was the craziest, that was the weirdest thing I ever found. And my buddy Jake Harper was with me when I found it. My brother Chad seen it, my brother Ronnie seen it, my mom seen it. Multiple friends of mine seen it. I showed everybody this creepy ass thing. I brought it home. My mom's like, what the fuck is that? And my mom's like, you can't have that here. I kept it there anyway, till it died. I was trying to feed it little frogs and crickets and shit. I didn't know what it ate. But it just died on me.
When war broke out and labor shortages developed, women no longer confined to traditional
And I
roles,
still don't know
were
what
actively
goddamn
encouraged to
thing.
leave
That
home
thing
to
was a
work.
mutant. I'm telling you what, it
They
came
were
from
drawn to
Karis Chemical
manufacturing and
area.
agriculture, and
And
worked
back
in
when we were
factories and
growing up,
shipyards
there was a
across the
bunch of
country.
little chemical pools out there.
Mining
Like
was
mixed
one of the
with
few
water
fields
and
that
shit
remained
like
a male
that.
domain.
And we would swim in them. In fact, we got in trouble once and had to, Karis Chemical had to give all of our parents this stuff to wash us off because we were swimming in one of their little pools.
To employment. But recruitment fell far short of the target set. The exhibition in Worcester, for example, secured 100 volunteer workers. It had aimed for 2,000. For some women, balancing work and family was the sticking point. The jobs on offer really
I don't
catered
think
for
I ever
part-time
found
hours.
anything else weird like
Nonetheless,
that. I've
to
seen a
sustain
lot
the
of
war
weird
effort,
bugs
the nation
and
needed workers and
they're all like
volunteers
just
from all
normal
corners
bugs.
of
They're just
society.
weird looking and
If you
shit.
think about the war effort, you know, the absolutely massive amount of production for the uniforms, the meals, the weapons, and it's just not enough people
I
going
think
into
the
industry.
coolest animal
As the war
I've ever
progressed,
saw out
various pieces
here.
of legislation mandated women's work.
Let me think.
In December
It'd be like this
1941,
weasel
the
creature
National
I
Service
seen in
Number 2 Act
Princeton.
was implemented. All
It
single
seemed
women
like a
between 20
weasel
and
or
21
a
were
stoat.
called up.
It wasn't a ferret,
Married
but
women
it
were
was like
exempt
a weasel.
and could volunteer.
And I've never seen one before.
The
It was
powers
just
were
awesome.
extended in February
That and the
1952 to
salamander,
women between 20 and 30.
the one out at
They could be
Madison,
employed
because I haven't
only
seen
through
one
the
since I was a
employment
kid.
exchange. This, it was
That was
hoped,
pretty
would ensure
cool.
that their labor was directed to the war effort.
So they directed you, you had to go, and I think people don't appreciate what that actually
Yeah,
means
get out
because
of
you were
there. What are you
placed
doing
in a
over
factory. You have no power to leave because you're committing an offence if you leave. And of course, that's why some women took time out or they were very slow at what they did because they didn't really want to be there.
Balancing the needs of total war and the needs of family at home was a point of tension for many women.
Damn, this thing.
But for others,
On my
the war
leg
provided
here,
an
man,
opportunity
it
to
feels like
undertake
maybe
roles
grenade.
they could not normally do. Economic motivation was also common.
Many women with children did go into the war effort because, you see, the government paid these things called separation allowance. So a wife would probably only get 30 shillings a week, and that was not enough to pay rent and bring up your children. So most women had to work anyway.
Some women found having to work yielded attractive benefits.
Because the government had taken away your civil rights. In return, you got an awful lot. You got factory canteens, hot midday meals for almost nothing.